welcome back to your channel. Welcome to part 4 of season 2 of The Hawk, the Haunted Village. In the previous episode, we witnessed Yasser's terrifying condition and every attempt the villagers made to save him. When all of their efforts failed, Ramin suggested asking for help from a man who had faced something similar many years ago. A man who, perhaps, was the only one capable of saving Yasser. Now, let's continue the story. Just as I told you. The moment the evening call to prayer ended, Yasser's horrifying screams echoed through the house once again. We rushed upstairs, but Mr. Molay had already reached the room before us. Yasser was pressed tightly into the corner of the wall with both arms spread wide, like a thief desperately searching for a way to escape. Mr. Molay stared directly into his eyes while reciting something loudly. If I'm not mistaken, it was verses from the Quran. Little by little, Yasser stopped struggling. Then he slowly slid down the wall and sat on the floor, breathing rapidly. Once he calmed down, Mr. Molay motioned for the four of us to carry him into the middle of the room. He immediately began unpacking his equipment. The four of us held Yasser's arms and legs. When Mr. Molay finished preparing everything, he looked at us and said, "You don't need to hold him anymore." "At least, not yet." Then he asked me to bring him some glowing charcoal. I had no idea where to find any. I looked at Mohammed. He understood immediately. "I'll get it, sir." A few minutes later, Mohammed returned carrying a small metal ash pan filled with burning coals. Mr. Malay glanced inside. "Couldn't you find anything better than this?" Embarrassed, Mohammed lowered his head. Just then, loud noises erupted from the courtyard below. It sounded as though a crowd had suddenly rushed inside. Mohammed smiled. "Thank God, the Sheikh is back. I'll go borrow his brazier." He had barely reached the door when Mr. Molay shouted, "Don't open it! The Sheikh hasn't returned." All four of us froze and turned toward him. Although he looked completely confident, I could clearly sense the fear in his voice. Without wasting another second, he finished preparing everything and told us to switch off the lights. Once he settled in place, he began chanting again. But this time, it wasn't the Quran. While reciting, he placed something thick and greasy onto the burning charcoal. Seconds later, the flames suddenly flared upward. A strangely pleasant fragrance filled the room. Mr. Molay looked up. "Hold him!" Before we could even move, Yasser suddenly sprang to his feet. Just as quickly, he collapsed back onto the carpet. The young man who had dared Yasser grabbed not only his arms, but also his neck. Mr. Molay immediately slapped his hand away. "Don't touch his throat." A few moments later, Mr. Molay stopped chanting. Only then did we notice the sounds coming from the courtyard. Just like the night before. Voices, people talking. Except this time, everything sounded muffled. Nothing could be understood. I found myself listening closely. Then suddenly, a voice echoed inside my head. "Don't listen to them." I immediately looked toward Mr. Molay. His lips hadn't moved. He wasn't speaking. The others were staring at him with the exact same expression. It seemed they had heard the voice too. I lowered my gaze. And then, I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. Behind Mr. Molay, several figures were standing silently. Some were tall, others were short. Every one of them wore white clothing. For a moment, I thought I was about to die from fear. Again, the mysterious voice echoed inside my mind, this time trying to calm me. I couldn't understand why the Sheikh and the others still hadn't returned from the mosque. They knew exactly what was supposed to happen tonight. As my thoughts raced, I suddenly felt Yasser's leg twitch beneath my hand. Before I could react, his entire body began shaking violently. Then he lifted his head. His eyes were filled with pure hatred. He slowly opened his mouth. I braced myself for another stream of horrible insults, but nothing came out. Every time he inhaled, every time he opened his mouth, only silence escaped. It honestly looked as though someone had muted him. Finally, Mr. Molay stepped forward and passed a white cloth across Yasser's face. Then he turned toward us. "Close your eyes. And no matter what happens, do not open them." For some reason, he looked directly at me while saying it. I shut my eyes tightly. The temptation to peek was almost unbearable. Then something happened that instantly changed my mind. A strange hand rested gently on top of mine. Judging by the frightened questions around me, the others had felt it too. Moments later, it felt as though someone lifted Yasser off the floor, then carried him away. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence, but it wasn't Yasser's voice. It sounded like a terrified woman. With my eyes still closed, I stood there in that freezing room, drenched in sweat. Then suddenly, the lights came back on. Mr. Molay's voice came from behind us. "Let him go. It's over." When I opened my eyes, I instinctively stepped backward. Mr. Molay was sitting exactly where he had been before, right beside Yasser. Yasser's face was as white as a corpse. He wasn't moving at all. Before I could ask anything, Mr. Molay calmly said, "He's fine. He's only weak. But from now on, he'll have to be much more careful." All four of us were desperate for answers. Finally, the boldest among us, the young man who had given Yasser the dare, asked, "But didn't they carry Yasser out of the room?" Now completely relaxed, Mr. Molay continued packing his belongings. Then he quietly answered, "It wasn't Yasser." Those four words made my head spin. I thought I was about to throw up. I asked Mr. Molay if I could step outside for some fresh air. Smiling confidently, he nodded. I hurried into the courtyard. The freezing village wind mixed with light rain and struck my face. I didn't even want to think anymore. A few moments later, the young man stepped outside. He lit a cigarette. After taking his first drag, he muttered, "I don't trust any of them." Before he could finish his second, he suddenly bent over and vomited, cursing under his breath. He walked toward the alley. When I stepped outside, I saw the sheikh and the rest of the villagers finally returning. Only then did I check my watch. The entire ritual had lasted just 15 minutes. The sheikh rushed toward me. "Did Yasser do anything?" "It's over," I answered. Before I could explain further, the sheikh slapped his forehead and ran inside. Everyone else followed, including Yasser's parents. Within seconds, the house was filled with shouting and crying. No matter how hard I tried to explain, no one listened. Terrified, I left the house and walked toward the village grocery store. Thankfully, the shop was open, just as always. It seemed the owner had sworn never to close, no matter what happened in the village. I bought a bottle of soda, hoping it would settle my stomach. Just then, my phone rang. It was Muhammad. Confused, he asked, "What on earth did you tell the sheikh?" I explained that he had misunderstood me and rushed inside before I could finish. About an hour later, after everything had finally settled down, I returned to the sheikh's house. From inside, I could hear the sound of forks and spoons. Happy to hear everything was over, I rushed upstairs, hoping dinner was finally ready. But the moment I opened the door, I froze. Kinesa was standing in the middle of the room, clanging two huge butcher knives together while chanting complete nonsense. I looked around the room, hoping someone would explain what was happening. Everyone looked embarrassed. Their eyes were fixed on the carpet. Everyone except one person. He was laughing again. I'm sure you already know who that was. I was still standing in the doorway, staring at the absurd scene, when a voice behind me said, "Move aside, young man. My hands are full." It was the sheikh, carrying a tray of hot tea. The moment he stepped inside, he frowned. "Woman, stop this blasphemous nonsense. Can't you see you're making everyone uncomfortable?" Suddenly, the young man who had dared Yezer burst into loud laughter. This time, he couldn't control himself anymore. Kinesa stopped and glared at him. "You animal, what are you laughing at?" Those words only made him laugh harder. He laughed, Kinesa cursed, until finally, after several minutes, the room settled down. Everyone quietly drank their tea. I noticed the sheikh still seemed upset with me, even though the misunderstanding had been his own. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "We should eat dinner early and get some sleep. We have a lot to do tomorrow." Kinesa, still annoyed, muttered, "Especially you. You've got plenty of work." Ignoring her sarcasm, the sheikh turned toward Mr. Molay. "Do you think there's any way to break the curse on that hill forever?" Mr. Molay slowly shook his head. "I doubt it. The situation on that hill is far more complicated than you think." After remaining silent for a long time, Haji Yadollah cursed whoever had caused all of this. The plan was to inspect the hill the following day. I secretly wished I could skip school and go with them. Dinner was finally served. After eating, Mohammed and I headed home. I asked him how Yasser was doing. He yawned. "Mr. Molay says he's going to prepare a protective talisman for him. He's still weak, but at least he isn't cursing anymore." We had barely entered the narrow village path when a terrible smell filled the air. I looked at Mohammed. He didn't react. The closer we came to the house, the stronger the smell became. Just as we reached the front gate, something near the hill caught my attention. I called Mohammed in panic and pointed toward the darkness. He glanced in that direction for a second. "I can't see anything in this darkness." Then he unlocked the door and went inside, but I remained standing there, staring at that silent hell. Part of me wished I had the strength to rip that cursed hill from the earth and throw it into the middle of the desert. Eventually, I forced myself to go inside. I had barely reached the stairs when I remembered the chickens. Annoyed, I went downstairs to check on them before returning. Then I heard it. I froze in the middle of the courtyard. It sounded like a group of people crying over the death of someone they loved. Those heartbreaking voices made my chest ache. Without looking back, I hurried inside. Mohammed had already disappeared beneath his blanket. He was asleep within seconds, for the first time in many days. I locked the front door before going to bed. It took nearly 2 hours before I finally fell asleep. I was exhausted, but every time I drifted off, the screams coming from the hill pulled me back awake. The next morning, Mohammed woke me. He was getting ready to leave for the barn. The moment he saw my exhausted face, he laughed. Enough with these holidays. Hurry up, go to school. Without even eating breakfast, I headed toward the mosque school. I had no energy for the children. They were excitedly talking about a young woman who had recently returned from the city. From their conversation, I realized she was probably the new teacher. For a brief moment, I dreamed she might replace me, so I could finally escape this village. I was lost in those thoughts when one of the children asked, "Teacher, aren't you ending class today?" I looked at the clock. 12:10. Without wasting another second, I dismissed the class. Thankfully, after the students' recent improvement, which was mostly thanks to Mohammed Javad, we no longer needed extra lessons. As I walked back through the village path, I noticed four familiar figures near the hill. Curious, I hurried toward them. Muhammad, Haji Yadola, the Sheikh, and Mr. Molay. After greeting them, I asked, "Mr. Molay, did you discover anything?" The Sheikh was in a hurry to reach the mosque. Mr. Molay answered, "I realized some things long ago. But last night I learned something new. Since you live here, you deserve to know the truth as well." I immediately agreed, but he shook his head. "I'll come to your house tonight. I'll explain everything there." With no other choice, I nodded. When Muhammad and I arrived home, there was no lunch waiting. I looked at him hopefully. He sighed. "Ask the Sheikh and Haji Yadola. They kept me busy all morning. There was no escaping it. Once again, it was time to open one of our precious cans of tuna. After lunch, I counted every minute until nightfall. After the evening prayers, Muhammad and I returned home together with the same group from earlier. For some reason, Haji Yadola refused to leave us alone. Muhammad served everyone hot milk. We hadn't had any tea in nearly a week. Before speaking, Mr. Molay made Muhammad and me promise several times that we would never repeat what we were about to hear. We both agreed without hesitation. The Sheikh smiled nervously. "The speed with which you accepted worries me." Haji Yadola rolled his eyes. "Oh, let the man talk already." Mr. Molay took a deep breath. "Last night, I realized the Hills problem isn't just one thing. It's much worse. I hope you've learned your lesson. Never go near that hill again." I looked at Muhammad in disbelief. After everything we've been through, we'd have to be completely insane. Mr. Molay nodded. Many years ago, a dead sorcerer hid treasures inside his house. Treasures that attracted the guardians to that hill. And because of everything he did, and because of the hatred he carried toward the villagers, that hill will remain a playground for evil spirits for another 40 years. He warned us never to let greed destroy our lives. Confused, I asked, "We'd never go there anyway. So why tell us about the treasure at all?" Mr. Molay glanced toward Haji Yadola. "It seems a few villagers already know parts of the story. They may try to convince you to help them." Haji Yadola slapped his knee. "You mean Akbar?" Mr. Molay shrugged. "I don't know his name." The gathering was slowly coming to an end. Finally, I gathered enough courage to ask about everything I had experienced. Almost as if he had been expecting the question, Mr. Molay asked, "When was the last time you sensed them?" The memory of the previous night instantly sent chills through my body. "It was just last night. There was a terrible smell. I could even hear screams coming from the hill." Mr. Molay fell silent for a moment. Then he said, "From everything I've learned, you are unusually sensitive. As long as you live here, never stay alone. Whether you like it or not, your house sits right on one of their paths. And those cries you heard last night, they were mourning one of their own." Haji Yadola looked genuinely shocked. "So that's what it was." As he was leaving, he warned me one last time, "Don't chase after strange voices." Then, quite bluntly, he added, "And stop being so damn curious." The next morning, Mr. Molay left the village with Yasser. Apparently, Yasser still needed to remain under his supervision. Several peaceful days passed. Nothing unusual happened. Late one afternoon, Muhammad walked into the room carrying a plastic bag. "Ramin, I'm going to the bathhouse. Want to come?" I practically jumped to my feet. "Forget it. Take a shower here," he laughed. "Come on. I promise nothing will happen. We'll even save some gas." No matter how much he insisted, I refused. The last thing I wanted was to see another pair of hairy feet. Giving up, Mohammed took his bath at home instead. While he was inside, someone knocked on the door. It was Haji Yadola. He was carrying a sack full of beets. He handed them to me. "These are perfect for making roasted beets." I thanked him. Honestly, he was a helpful old man. We stood outside talking for nearly half an hour. Before leaving, he warned me again. "Take care of yourself. Mr. Molay says you're sensitive. If you're unlucky, you might see dwarfs or goats. But if you ignore the voices, I doubt anything will happen." I promised him I'd be careful. He climbed onto his motorcycle and drove away. As soon as he disappeared down the village path, I closed the gate Since I was already in the courtyard, I decided to wash up. I had barely stepped out of the bathroom when I heard someone running outside. Whoever it was, they were crying. It sounded like a child. Curious, I opened the gate. One of my brightest students was sprinting toward the cursed hill, tears streaming down his face. I immediately ran into the alley. Abul Fazl, where are you going? It's dangerous. He never even looked back. He just kept running toward the hill. I assumed he'd argued with his father and had run away from home. I couldn't let another child end up like Yasser, so I ran after him. He disappeared among the ruined houses on top of the hill. Without thinking, I followed. Just then, my phone rang. It was Mohammed. He couldn't find me at home and was worried. I quickly explained about Abul Fasl running toward the hill. Immediately he shouted, "Don't be an idiot. Wait there until I get there." I still had the phone against my ear when I heard the sound of a small bell echoing through the ruins. Instinctively, I took several steps backward. Then, a goat slowly emerged from the darkness. I couldn't stop staring. There was something terribly wrong about it. The goat turned toward me, then slowly rose onto its hind legs. At that moment, I knew something evil was happening. I turned to run. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Relief flooded over me. Thank God, Mohammed's here. I spun around to show him the goat. Instead, my heart nearly stopped. There was no Mohammed. Another goat, exactly the same as the first one, was standing right behind me. It was smiling. It had come so close without making a sound that I screamed loud enough for the entire village to hear. I ran down the side of the hill as fast as I could. My strength slowly faded, then I collapsed face first into the mud. When I finally regained consciousness, someone was carrying me on his back. For one terrifying second, I thought it wasn't human. Then I recognized Mohammed's voice. He was carrying me home, praying out loud the entire way. Once inside, he laid me down beside the heater. When he realized I was awake, he immediately started yelling at me. Covered in mud, I simply stared at him. He handed me a towel. "Here, clean your face." Even a child would have known not to go near that hill. I wiped a lump of mud from my cheek. "I told you I saw one of my students. I still don't know what happened to him." Mohammed sighed deeply. "You still think there was really a child? How stubborn can you be?" I stood up. "What if there's even a 1% chance I was right? Could you live with yourself if something happened to him?" Mohammed sighed again. "What's the kid's name?" I told him. He immediately picked up the phone. "Oh, you mean Haji Yadollah's grandson?" A few seconds later, someone answered. Without any introduction, Mohammed asked, "Is your son home?" He is." "Good." "No, nothing happened. Goodbye." He hung up. According to his father, he's been sitting in front of the television this whole time. Since you're his teacher, tell him to watch less TV. Relief washed over me. I headed toward the kitchen. I realized something. Everything that had happened recently had made me mentally stronger. Together, Mohammed and I washed the beets and put them on to cook. Honestly, those roasted beets tasted incredible after a night like that. Throughout dinner, Mohammed kept questioning me. What exactly did that goat look like? I thought carefully. It was a goat, but it walked on two legs, and somehow it didn't even feel real. Mohammed lifted a giant beet out of the pot and laughed. If it had been real, it would have attacked the kid, not you. The moment he mentioned the child, our argument started all over again. The rest of the night passed like that. The following morning, I woke up exhausted. By then, it had become normal. Every time I encountered one of those things, I spent the next day weak and drained. It was early March. On my way to the mosque school, I noticed an excavator heading toward the hill. At last, the reconstruction project had begun. Strangely enough, I had started seeing that hill differently. Compared to a giant two-legged goat, those little dwarves no longer seemed frightening at all. One Thursday I left my class in Mohammed's hands and headed to the district office to request a few days of leave. The school principal had told me to apply several days in advance so I wouldn't have any problems. Unbelievably, the one day I actually had enough time, everything went smoothly. It wasn't even noon yet when I found myself standing in the town square waiting for the van back to the village. Then, something in the crowd caught my attention. An old man was walking along the sidewalk without ever lifting his head. There was something unusual about the way he moved. He wasn't limping, it was simply different. I'm sure you can imagine what I mean. Curiosity got the better of me. I started following him. Every few steps, the old man stopped and glanced over his shoulder. It seemed he knew I was following him. Little by little, he left the sidewalk and turned into a narrow alley lined with old mud brick walls. You might think I was being foolish, but by then, those things had learned how to cloud my mind. Whenever they wanted, I forgot everything else. I was just about to step into the alley when the old man suddenly turned around. A familiar smile spread across his face. Then, without warning, the smile vanished. He muttered a curse under his breath. His expression changed completely, almost angrily. He hurried away. Before I could follow him, someone called my name. Ramin, is that really you? You're still alive, son? The voice sounded familiar. When I turned around, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the doctor. After all this time, he had finally returned to the village. I was genuinely happy to see him. I hugged him tightly. He had only just arrived in the district. He was still dressed in black. It was obvious that even after several months, he was still mourning his mother. The doctor didn't have much to say, but I had an entire lifetime of stories waiting to be told. He smiled faintly. I can't wait until we reach the village. Start from the beginning. The two of us sat down on the edge of the sidewalk, and I began telling him everything that had happened. We became so absorbed in the conversation that we completely lost track of time. Eventually, the loud horn of Esmail's van snapped us back to reality, no? And that's where part 4 comes to an end. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave a like. Your support helps this series reach more people. Until next time, may God protect you. With respect, Tiger Moon.